Bloody and bruised Dr. Maya Wilson stood in the precinct doorway dragging two unconscious officers behind her with their own chain. The station fell silent. Nobody recognized her as the woman these same officers had publicly humiliated hours earlier. Nobody knew she was their new boss. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice turned upside down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed injustice and wished someone would stand up against it. Subscribe now because this story of chains, courage, and accountability is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens next when a brilliant black woman turns the tables on those who tried to break her spirit. Dr. Maya Wilson adjusted her rearview mirror as she drove through Oak Ridge, an affluent suburb of Chicago with tree-lined streets and sprawling mansions. At 38, she had already accomplished more than most people would in a lifetime: a doctorate in neuropsychology, a distinguished career in military intelligence, and now her most prestigious appointment yet. The classified government position had been finalized last week, but the public announcement wouldn't come until Monday. Maya smiled to herself, thinking about the look on her mother's face when she finally shared the news. The peaceful drive shattered when flashing blue and red lights appeared in her mirror. Maya checked her speed, 5 miles under the limit, and signaled properly before pulling her luxury sedan to the curb. She'd been through this routine before. As a black woman driving an expensive car, getting pulled over in white neighborhoods was practically a rite of passage. 2 white officers approached, one on each side of her vehicle. The taller one, whose nameplate read Keller, tapped on her window with unnecessary force. "License and registration," he demanded, without greeting or explanation for the stop. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" Maya asked calmly, hands visible on the steering wheel as her father had taught her decades ago. Officer Keller's expression hardened. "Taillights out," he said curtly, though Maya knew this was false. She'd had the car serviced just yesterday. The second officer, Donovan, circled the vehicle, his hand resting on his holster. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he asked, peering through her passenger window. Maya maintained her composure. "I'm moving here for work. I start a new position on Monday," Officer Keller scoffed. "Right. And what kind of work would that be?" The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. "I'm a neuropsychologist," Maya answered, reaching slowly for her credentials. "Don't move." Keller barked his hand instantly on his weapon. "Step out of the vehicle." Now. Maya knew arguing would only escalate the situation. She complied, stepping out with deliberate slowness. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. If you'd just let me show you my ID. Hands on the car. Spread your legs," Keller interrupted while Donovan spoke into his radio requesting backup for an uncooperative subject. Maya placed her hands on the hood. "I'm being completely cooperative, officers. I know my rights, and I'd like to know the actual reason for this stop." Something in her tone, perhaps the educated confidence, perhaps the subtle implication that she understood the law, triggered Officer Keller. His face flushed red. "You think you know the law? I am the law out here." He moved closer, invading her personal space. "I smell something suspicious. We're going to search your vehicle." Maya stood her ground. "You don't have probable cause for a search. I do not consent." The situation deteriorated rapidly. Keller grabbed Maya's wrist, twisting it behind her back while Donovan seized her other arm. Within seconds, she was handcuffed and forced against the car with unnecessary roughness. Resisting arrest, Keller announced loudly, playing to the small crowd of neighbors beginning to gather. They searched her car without consent, throwing her belongings onto the street. Books, research papers, and clothing scattered across the pavement. Then came the moment that confirmed Maya's worst fears. Keller emerged from the vehicle holding a small bag of white powder that hadn't been there minutes earlier. "Well, well. What do we have here?" he asked, with theatrical surprise. "That's not mine," Maya stated firmly. "You just planted that." Keller laughed. "They all say that. A doctor, huh? Self-medicating with something stronger than aspirin, looks like." While checking her identification, the officers completely missed the federal government clearance card tucked into a separate compartment of her wallet. They were too busy putting on a show for the growing audience of neighborhood residents. Some filmed with their phones, others watched with uncomfortable expressions, but no one intervened. "These cuffs don't seem secure enough for our doctor friend here," Keller announced, returning to his patrol car. He came back with something that made Maya's blood run cold, a heavy-duty chain typically used for transporting high-risk offenders. "This should keep you in place while we finish our investigation." As Keller secured the chain around her wrists and then to a nearby streetlight, Donovan continued ransacking her vehicle. Personal documents, family photos, and professional credentials were scattered carelessly across the street. Maya noticed Donovan eyeing the expensive watch on her wrist, a gift from her parents when she earned her doctorate. When Keller turned away, Donovan slipped the watch off her wrist and into his pocket with practiced efficiency. Chained to a streetlight like an animal, Maya stood silently memorizing every detail of both officers' appearances, badge numbers, and behaviors. Her military training had taught her to observe and analyze even in the most stressful situations. These men had no idea who they were dealing with, but they would soon find out. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as Maya remained chained to the streetlight. 1 hour stretched into 2, while officers Keller and Donovan deliberately prolonged her humiliation. Sweat trickled down her back, and her professional attire, selected for her first visit to her new office, now clung uncomfortably to her skin. So Doc Keller taunted, circling her like a predator. "Who's your supplier? Someone at the hospital slipping you samples." Maya maintained her dignity through silence. Keller crouched down, picking up one of her research journals on neurological responses to trauma. "Published papers, huh? Creative writing must be your hobby." He laughed, then deliberately stepped on the journal, grinding it into the pavement with his boot heel. Oops. Donovan played the marginally more reasonable partner, though his performance wasn't convincing. "Listen, if you cooperate and tell us where you got the drugs, maybe we can work something out. Otherwise, your fancy doctor career is over before it starts." Maya finally spoke, her voice steady despite her rage. "I served 8 years in military intelligence before earning my doctorate. I've worked with law enforcement agencies across 3 continents. And I can assure you, what you've done today will have consequences." Both officers erupted in laughter. "Military intelligence, right?" Keller snorted. "And I'm the Secretary of Defense." He turned to his partner. "You hear that, Donovan? We should be saluting her." The gathered crowd's reactions split visibly along racial lines. White residents watched from a safe distance, some with visible discomfort, but none intervening. Their expressions suggested internal justifications. If the police were treating her this way, she must have done something to deserve it. The few black residents who paused showed different expressions: recognition, resignation, and carefully contained anger. They maintained distance too, but for different reasons. Experience had taught them that intervening would only create another victim, not help the first one. A black teenage boy attempted to film the incident more closely, capturing clear footage of Maya's restraints and the scattered contents of her car. Officer Donovan quickly intercepted him, positioning his body to block the camera angle. "Move along, kid. Police business." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Maya observed a movement on a nearby porch, an elderly white woman watching with increasing agitation. Unlike the others, she didn't turn away from the scene. Instead, after several minutes of observation, she slowly made her way down her front steps and approached. "Officer," she called, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being respected. "I'm Eleanor Prentice. I've known this young woman's family for years." Maya had never seen this woman before, but immediately understood she was attempting to intervene. "Mrs. Prentice," Keller responded with forced politeness that didn't reach his eyes, "this is police business." "Please return to your home." "I most certainly will not," Mrs. Prentice replied, drawing herself up to her full height, which barely reached Keller's shoulder. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 47 years, and I can vouch for this woman's character. This treatment is completely unwarranted." Keller's demeanor darkened. "Ma'am, if you don't step back, I'll have to consider you as interfering with police procedure." The threat sent Mrs. Prentice reluctantly retreating, though she remained watching from her porch, now on her phone. Throughout this ordeal, Maya's training took over. She wasn't just enduring, she was gathering intelligence. She noted which key opened the locks on her restraints when Keller momentarily loosened them to adjust their position. She observed their patrol habits, the timing of their radio check-ins, and most importantly, she noticed their body cameras. Keller's was turned off completely while Donovan's red recording light flickered intermittently, suggesting it had been tampered with to malfunction at convenient intervals. She memorized their badge numbers, names, shift patterns based on radio calls and physical vulnerabilities. If military intelligence had taught her anything, it was how to identify weak points and strategic opportunities. When the officers finally returned to their vehicle for lunch, leaving her chained in the heat, Maya overheard fragments of their conversation through the open windows. Just like that time with the professor guy, nobody believed him either. Easy to delete the dashcam footage, just stick to the story about the drugs. Each word fueled Maya's determination. This wasn't their first abuse of power, but if she had anything to say about it, it might be their last. As she watched them laughing while eating sandwiches in air-conditioned comfort, Maya knew with absolute certainty that she would not be their victim. She would be their reckoning. When the officers finally returned from their extended lunch break, Maya noticed something critical. Officer Keller had carelessly left the key to her chains in his back pocket visible when he bent down to adjust his boot. Her trained eyes didn't miss this detail, nor did she overlook Officer Donovan's increasingly nervous glances at his partner. Donovan's body language suggested growing discomfort with Keller's extreme behavior. His gaze occasionally met Maya's with something approaching uncertainty, a potential weakness in their alliance, another detail filed away for strategic use. "Time to go for a ride," Dr. Keller announced, emphasizing her title with mocking contempt. County lockup has a special welcome program for drug dealers who think they're better than everyone else. They removed the chain from the streetlight, but kept Maya bound intentionally, parading her toward their patrol car. The neighborhood spectators had thinned, but not disappeared entirely. Maya calculated her options, knowing this transition presented both risk and opportunity. Timing would be everything. As they approached, the vehicle movement at the periphery caught everyone's attention. Mrs. Prentice was returning, this time accompanied by an elderly gentleman in a tailored suit. "Officers," the man called out, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm Judge William Prentice, retired from the district court. My wife has informed me of a disturbing situation, and I'd like your names and badge numbers immediately." Keller's reaction was instant and violent. He shoved Maya roughly against the patrol car, causing her head to strike the doorframe. The impact split her eyebrow, sending a trickle of blood down her face. "Stay right there," he hissed, before turning to address the approaching couple. "Sir, this is an active arrest situation. Please step back." In that moment, something broke inside Maya Wilson. Not her spirit, that remained unbreakable, but the dam holding back decades of accumulated rage at injustices endured. The blood warming her face triggered a cascade of memories, being the only black student in advanced placement classes and constantly having her intelligence questioned. Watching less qualified white colleagues receive promotions she had earned during her military service, hearing patients request a different doctor despite her expertise, being followed by security in high-end stores while shopping for professional attire, and countless traffic stops for routine checks that white drivers never seemed to experience. This wasn't just about today. It was about a lifetime of being treated as less than equal, less than human. And in this moment, with blood dripping down her face, Maya decided it was enough. Have you ever reached that breaking point where you knew you couldn't take one more second of injustice? Comment number 1. If you believe Maya was justified in what she did next. Or comment number 2. If you think she should have continued complying. Either way, hit that like button if you've ever wished you could stand up against unfair treatment. With Officer Keller distracted by the Prentices, Maya executed her plan with military precision. Years of combat training took over, as she used the chain's momentum and leverage to her advantage. One fluid motion, that's all it took to catch Keller completely off guard. She disarmed him with a swift strike to his wrist, simultaneously retrieving the key from his pocket with practiced fingers. Before Donovan could process what was happening, Maya had freed one hand and was using the heavy chain as a weapon. She targeted pressure points with surgical precision, non-lethal, but immediately incapacitating. Keller went down first, a look of shock replacing his arrogance as he collapsed to his knees, then face first onto the pavement. Donovan reached for his weapon, but Maya was faster, using the chain's weight to knock his arm aside before delivering a precise strike that left him gasping for air beside his partner. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Maya now stood over both incapacitated officers. Mrs. Prentice, rather than fleeing in fear, pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "This is Eleanor Prentice at 1442 Oak Ridge Drive. I need to report police brutality and subsequent civilian self-defense. Send additional officers immediately and tell them Judge Prentice is on scene as a witness." Maya methodically secured both officers with their own restraints, her movements calm and deliberate despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She recovered her stolen watch from Donovan's pocket, then picked up Keller's phone, which had fallen during the altercation. A quick scroll through his text messages revealed exactly what she suspected: a pattern of targeted harassment against black residents in the neighborhood, complete with congratulatory messages from fellow officers after successful removals, documentation of the corruption she'd just experienced firsthand. What would you do if you suddenly had the upper hand against those who abused their power? Would you walk away, call for backup, or take matters into your own hands? The clock is ticking for Maya, and her decision in the next few minutes will change everything. Stay tuned to see what choice she makes, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the moment when this extraordinary woman shows exactly who she really is. With both officers restrained and incapacitated, Maya stood at a critical crossroads. The growing crowd had transformed from passive observers to active witnesses, many recording the aftermath on their phones. Several black residents cautiously approached, offering assistance, while others called out warnings. "You need to get out of here now," urged a middle-aged man in a business suit. "They'll kill you for this badge or no badge." Another voice joined in. "My brother took down an officer in self-defense with 20 witnesses. Still got 15 years. The system doesn't care what they did to you." Maya understood these warnings weren't exaggerations. She'd studied enough cases during her career to know how rarely justice prevailed when black civilians confronted police misconduct, regardless of circumstances or evidence. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, somehow surviving the chaos intact. She retrieved it with her now free hands and saw Colonel James Richardson's name on the screen. Her former commanding officer had remained a trusted mentor after her transition to civilian life. "Maya, what the hell is happening?" Richardson's voice carried both concern and military directness. "I'm getting alerts about an incident in Oak Ridge involving an officer down. Please tell me that's not your new neighborhood." "It is," Maya confirmed, turning away from the crowd for a moment of privacy. "2 officers detained me without cause, planted evidence, and used excessive force. I defended myself." A heavy sigh came through the speaker. "I know you, so I'm sure that's the understatement of the year. Listen carefully. I can have a private security team at your location in 20 minutes. They'll extract you and get you across state lines before local backup arrives. We can sort out the legal issues once you're safe." It was a tempting offer. Richardson had connections throughout government and military channels. He could make this disappear, protect her from immediate consequences. As Maya considered this option, another text message appeared on her screen. "Dr. Wilson, we're expecting you at the federal building by 2 p.m. for your security credentials and orientation." "Is everything on schedule?" Director Hargrove. The message was a stark reminder of the oath she'd taken multiple times throughout her career: to uphold justice and the law, not just when convenient, but especially when difficult. After a moment of contemplation that felt like hours compressed into seconds, Maya made her decision. "I appreciate the offer, Colonel, but that's not how this ends." Maya Richardson began to protest. "I know what I'm doing," she interrupted with quiet determination. "This isn't just about me anymore." After ending the call, Maya addressed the gathered witnesses. "I need everyone with footage of what happened here today to send it to this email address." She recited a secure government account, watching as several people immediately began typing on their phones. She approached the Prentices directly. Would you be willing to follow me to the station as witnesses to the elderly? Judge nodded without hesitation. We most certainly will. Maya then turned her attention to the patrol car and the unconscious officers. With the same methodical efficiency that had characterized her military career, she loaded both men into the back of their own vehicle. Officer Donovan regained consciousness during this process, his eyes widening with fear rather than the previous contempt. Unlike his partner who remained unconscious, Donovan seemed more confused than angry. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Taking you to your precinct," Maya answered calmly. "But first we're going to have a conversation." As she drove toward the station, Maya engaged Donovan in conversation, employing psychological techniques from her training. "How long have you been working with Officer Keller?" she asked, her tone conversational as if they were colleagues rather than captor and captive. 3 years, he answered cautiously. "Before that, traffic division, mostly routine stuff." Maya nodded, watching him in the rearview mirror. "When did the targeting begin?" The specific focus on black residents in affluent neighborhoods, Donovan's face registered shock, then resignation. "I never wanted," he began, then stopped himself. "Keller said it was about maintaining property values, keeping the neighborhood safe. The sergeant approved it unofficially. Said as long as we kept it clean, the department would back us up." Maya activated Keller's body camera, which she'd retrieved and switched on. "Say that again, please." Recognizing his vulnerability, Donovan began talking freely, unburdening himself of 3 years of accumulated guilt. He described a systematic pattern of harassment targeting black residents in Oak Ridge with tacit approval from supervisors. He admitted to participating out of peer pressure and fear of retaliation from fellow officers if he reported the misconduct. As they approached the precinct, Maya reviewed her strategic options. She was about to walk into a potentially hostile environment where officers would likely close ranks to protect their own regardless of evidence. But she also possessed advantages. They couldn't anticipate military training, psychological expertise, irrefutable evidence, and most importantly, a position of authority they had no idea existed. The precinct came into view, a modern building with an American flag fluttering outside. Maya took a deep breath, cementing her resolve. She wasn't just seeking personal justice. She was about to deliver a reckoning for every person who had ever suffered similar treatment without the resources or position to fight back. Whatever happened next would send ripples far beyond this one police department in one affluent suburb. It would challenge the very system that allowed such abuses to flourish in shadows and silence. Maya parked the patrol car prominently in front of the precinct, directly beneath the security cameras monitoring the entrance. Rather than seeking assistance from other officers, she made a calculated decision to create a spectacle impossible to ignore or cover up. She dragged both men by their chain across the parking lot toward the entrance. Officer Keller, now semi-conscious, muttered incoherent threats, while Donovan remained surprisingly compliant, his earlier confession seeming to have broken something fundamental in his resistance. Passersby stopped to stare, several pulling out phones to record the unprecedented sight of a bloodied black woman dragging 2 uniformed officers in chains. The prentices followed at a respectable distance, the retired judge speaking quietly into his phone, presumably to colleagues who might ensure proper handling of the situation. Maya pushed open the precinct doors with her shoulder, the heavy glass swinging wide to reveal the bustling interior. The front desk officer, a young man with a nameplate reading Garcia, looked up from his computer with the bored expression of someone expecting routine business. His eyes widened in shock, then alarm, as he registered the scene before him. "What the?" he exclaimed, jumping to his feet and drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. "Freeze! Hands up now!" Other officers in the vicinity responded instantly to the commotion surrounding Maya with drawn weapons within seconds. "I said hands up." Officer Garcia repeated, his voice cracking slightly with tension. Maya remained perfectly still, her military training evident in her composed posture, despite multiple firearms pointed at her. Blood still trickled from the wound on her forehead, but her gaze remained steady and unintimidated. With deliberate slowness, telegraphing each movement to avoid being shot, she reached into her pocket and produced her identification. She slid it across the desk without a word, maintaining eye contact with Officer Garcia throughout. The desk sergeant approached, picking up the ID with visible skepticism that transformed into confusion as he examined it. He looked from the credentials to Maya, then back again, before lifting a phone and dialing with uncharacteristic urgency. "Chief, you need to come down here right now," he said in a hushed tone, eyes never leaving Maya. "We have a situation." The station erupted into chaotic activity. Officers lowered their weapons but maintained their positions uncertainty, replacing their initial aggression. A door at the far end of the room opened, and a man in a white shirt with captain's bars emerged, surveying the scene with practiced authority. "What in God's name is happening here?" he demanded, approaching the group. The desk sergeant handed him Maya's identification wordlessly. The captain, whose nameplate identified him as Lieutenant Thomas Walker, studied it for a long moment before addressing Maya with markedly different tone. "Dr. Wilson, perhaps we should discuss this in my office." "No, Lieutenant Walker," Maya replied with quiet firmness. "Any conversation will happen right here in full view of your precinct cameras and these witnesses." She gestured toward the prentices who had followed her inside and now stood near the entrance, the judge's expression, a mixture of concern and grim determination. "These officers require medical attention," Maya continued, indicating Keller and Donovan on the floor. "Please ensure they receive it immediately." This request, showing concern for the well-being of men who had mistreated her, seemed to confuse the lieutenant more than anything else about the situation. He signaled to several officers who approached cautiously to assist their colleagues. As medical personnel were summoned, Maya formally requested to file charges against both officers, systematically listing their offenses: racial profiling, excessive force, false imprisonment, evidence tampering, and theft of personal property. She presented Keller's phone containing the incriminating text messages and pointed out the watch now back on her wrist, recovered from Officer Donovan's pocket. Lieutenant Walker's expression grew increasingly troubled as the evidence mounted. He attempted to redirect the situation toward damage control. "Dr. Wilson, I understand you've had a traumatic experience. I assure you we take allegations of misconduct very seriously. Our Internal Affairs Division will conduct a thorough investigation." Lieutenant Maya interrupted calmly. "This isn't merely an allegation, and an internal investigation won't be sufficient." She held up her phone, displaying dozens of incoming messages from witnesses already flooding social media with video evidence of her treatment. "The public record is quite clear." As if on cue, the front desk phone began ringing incessantly. Officer Garcia answered, his expression growing increasingly alarmed. "Sir, there are news vans pulling up outside. Channel 5 is requesting a statement about an incident involving officers Keller and Donovan." Lieutenant Walker's face paled visibly. The potential public relations disaster was unfolding faster than he could contain it. He adjusted his approach, becoming more accommodating but still attempting to control the narrative. "Dr. Wilson, I apologize for your experience today. Clearly, there's been a serious lapse in protocol. I promise you these officers will face appropriate disciplinary action." Maya's patience for bureaucratic evasion had reached its limit. "Lieutenant Walker, let me be absolutely clear about who I am and why I'm here." She retrieved her phone and displayed her official government credentials, the complete version, not just the identification she'd provided earlier. "I am Dr. Maya Wilson, newly appointed Regional Director of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, specifically tasked with investigating patterns of police misconduct in this jurisdiction." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background noise of the busy precinct seemed to halt momentarily as officers processed this revelation. "My late arrival at my new position today was because I was being unlawfully detained by officers now under my federal jurisdiction. This wasn't how I planned to introduce myself to your department, but it has been illuminating." Lieutenant Walker's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing genuine shock beneath. "The FBI Civil Rights Division. I wasn't aware of any new regional director appointment. The public announcement was scheduled for Monday." Maya explained calmly. "Today was meant to be a quiet orientation day." Instead, it became an unintentional field assessment of your department's practices. She gestured toward the still restrained officers receiving medical attention. Based on preliminary evidence, that assessment has identified significant concerns requiring immediate federal intervention. The precinct doors opened again, admitting more witnesses from the scene, several local community leaders who had been contacted by concerned residents, and the first of what would soon be many reporters. Maya stood at the center of the growing storm, her composure unshaken despite her disheveled appearance and the blood now drying on her face. She had entered this building in chains, yet somehow now commanded the room more authoritatively than any of the uniformed officers present. Lieutenant Walker recognized the rapidly deteriorating situation and made a strategic decision. Dr. Wilson, the chief, will want to speak with you directly. Please at least allow our medical staff to attend to your injuries while we contact him. Maya nodded her agreement to this reasonable request, maintaining her dignified stance, even as the precinct around her dissolved into barely controlled chaos. What had begun as a routine act of racial profiling was transforming into something none of the officers could have anticipated, a moment of reckoning that would forever change this department and potentially law enforcement practices throughout the region. Word of Maya's true identity spread through the precinct with the speed and impact of a shockwave. Officers whispered urgently in corners, radio chatter intensified, and personnel who hadn't been present began arriving with suspicious urgency. The atmosphere transformed from hostile to something more complex, a tense uncertainty tinged with defensive preparation. Chief Gregory Harmon arrived 20 minutes later, his tailored uniform and commanding presence suggesting someone accustomed to controlling difficult situations. He approached Maya with a carefully constructed expression of professional concern. "Dr. Wilson." He began extending his hand. "I'm Chief Harmon. I want to personally apologize for this unfortunate incident. If you join me in my office, we can discuss this matter privately and professionally." Maya noted the strategic shift from confrontation to containment. "Thank you, Chief Harmon, but as I explained to Lieutenant Walker, I prefer to maintain transparency in this discussion. Too much has already happened behind closed doors." The chief's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, I respect your preference, though it's somewhat unconventional." He gestured toward a nearby conference room visible through glass walls. "Perhaps this would be a suitable compromise. We can maintain visibility while providing some structure to our conversation." Maya agreed to this reasonable accommodation, followed by the prentices who had remained steadfastly present as witnesses. Inside the conference room, Chief Harmon's strategy became clear. He distanced himself and his department from the actions of Keller and Donovan, portraying them as a few bad apples who had somehow slipped through otherwise robust screening and supervision. "I want to assure you, Dr. Wilson, that what you experienced today is absolutely not representative of this department's values or standard practices," he insisted, his expression conveying practiced sincerity. "Officers Keller and Donovan will face immediate suspension pending a full investigation, and I personally guarantee appropriate disciplinary action." Maya listened silently, analyzing his body language, noting his careful avoidance of any admission that might suggest departmental culpability. She observed how he emphasized the isolated nature of the incident while glossing over systemic implications. When the chief finally paused, awaiting her response, Maya spoke with the measured precision that had characterized her military briefings. "Chief Harmon, I appreciate your assurances, but they contradict the evidence." She placed a tablet on the conference table displaying a series of charts and statistics. "Prior to accepting this position, I reviewed public records for all departments under my new jurisdiction. Your officers conduct traffic stops of black drivers at 4 times the rate of white drivers, despite demographic distribution that doesn't support such disparity. Excessive force complaints in your department are filed predominantly by minority residents, and 97% of those complaints are dismissed without action." She scrolled to another screen. "Most concerning is this pattern of incidents specifically in Oak Ridge. Black professionals detained, searched, and harassed while driving through or visiting the neighborhood. 23 separate incidents in the past year alone, all following remarkably similar patterns to what I experienced today. The chief's demeanor shifted from conciliatory to defensive. With all due respect, Dr. Wilson's statistical analysis can be misleading without proper context. Crime patterns, reporting variables, and demographic distribution all factor into these numbers. His eyes narrowed slightly. I'm also curious how you obtained some of this information, as certain departmental records aren't publicly accessible without proper authorization. I have proper authorization, Chief Harmon Maya replied calmly. As do the Justice Department analysts who compiled this preliminary assessment. She maintained unwavering eye contact. And while statistics can indeed be contextualized, Officer Donovan's recorded confession about targeting black residents under unofficial departmental guidance is considerably less ambiguous. The chief's face flushed with barely controlled anger, recorded under duress, I assume. After you physically assaulted 2 officers of the law, regardless of your position, Dr. Wilson, your actions today raise serious, legal, and ethical questions. Federal agent or not, you may have exceeded your authority. Other high-ranking officers in the room began subtly positioning themselves closer to the chief, a visual representation of ranks closing. The implied threat was clear. Maya might find herself facing charges rather than pressing them. Is it fair that even with evidence and authority, Maya still faces resistance from the system designed to protect everyone equally? Comment number 1. If you believe police departments should welcome oversight when problems are exposed, or comment number 2, if you think they're right to defend their officers first. Hit that like button if you're shocked by how quickly the tables turned on Maya despite her position. The tense standoff was interrupted by Maya's phone ringing. She answered without breaking eye contact with Chief Harmon, activating the speaker function. Dr. Wilson speaking. Maya, it's Attorney General Pearson. The voice on the speaker carried unmistakable authority. The chief's expression faltered slightly at the recognition of his ultimate superior in the law enforcement hierarchy. I've been briefed on the situation in Oak Ridge. Do you have Chief Harmon with you? Yes, sir. You're on speaker with Chief Harmon, myself, and several witnesses. Good, Chief Harmon. This is Attorney General Pearson. I want to be abundantly clear that Dr. Wilson has the Justice Department's full support in this investigation. Her appointment to the Civil Rights Division was specifically to address patterns of misconduct that have come to our attention in several jurisdictions, including yours. The Attorney General's tone left no room for misinterpretation. I understand there may be some resistance to federal oversight, but let me assure you that cooperation will be remembered favorably when determining the extent of departmental liability versus individual officer accountability. The implied threat was as clear as the chief's had been moments earlier, but backed by considerably more authority. Now I'd like to speak with you privately, Chief Harmon. Dr. Wilson, could you please transfer this call? Maya did so, handing her phone to the increasingly uncomfortable police chief, who took it and stepped into the hallway for privacy. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but when Chief Harmon returned, his demeanor had transformed. Whatever the Attorney General had said had effectively neutralized his resistance, at least temporarily. As this leadership confrontation unfolded, the 2 officers at the center of the incident faced divergent paths. Officer Keller, now fully conscious and furious, demanded union representation and refused to answer questions. His hostile attitude and refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing reflected the system at its most entrenched. Officer Donovan, however, continued his confession to internal affairs, investigators seemingly relieved to unburden himself of years of accumulated guilt. He detailed specific incidents, naming supervisors who had encouraged targeting certain neighborhoods and individuals based on race. Outside the precinct, the situation was escalating beyond anyone's control. News vans multiplied in the parking lot. Social media exploded with video clips and commentary, and local community leaders arrived, demanding answers. The precinct had become a pressure cooker of competing interests, police attempting to control the narrative media, pursuing the story protesters, demanding accountability, and federal authorities asserting jurisdiction. At the center of this storm, Maya maintained her composed demeanor, understanding that this confrontation extended far beyond one incident or even one department. It represented a fundamental challenge to a system that had operated unchecked for generations. The question now wasn't just whether two officers would face consequences for their actions, but whether an entire culture of policing would finally be forced to change. Do you think one person, even with authority and evidence, can really change a system that's been operating one way for generations? Or does lasting change require something more? The battle lines are drawn, but the war for justice is just beginning. Let's see what happens next as Maya navigates between personal vindication and systemic reform. As evening approached, Maya finally accepted medical attention for her injuries. The adrenaline that had sustained her through confrontation was fading, leaving behind exhaustion and the physical reality of her ordeal. The paramedic, a young black woman named Tasha, cleaned and bandaged the cut on Maya's forehead with gentle efficiency. "You're going to have a scar," Tasha commented quietly, applying butterfly stitches to the wound. "Not my first," Maya replied with a tired smile. Their eyes met in a moment of unspoken understanding. "My brother got pulled over 3 times last month, driving to his night shift at the hospital," Tasha said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Same officers twice. They never ticket him. Just keep him standing outside his car for 45 minutes while they run his information. Making him late for work." Maya nodded. "Does he report it?" "What's the point?" Tasha asked the rhetorical question, carrying the weight of generational experience. "Nothing changes." "Maybe this time it will," Maya responded, though the fatigue in her voice betrayed the immensity of the challenge ahead. When the paramedic finished, Maya retreated to a quiet corner of the precinct to call her family. Her mother answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. "Maya, I've been calling for hours." "There's something on the news about Oak Ridge." "I'm okay, Mom," Maya interrupted gently. "It's been a complicated first day." She provided a condensed version of events, downplaying the physical confrontation to spare her mother additional worry. "Lord, have mercy," her mother breathed. "Are you sure you're all right? Do you need me to come there?" "I'm fine, really, just tired." "Your father would be so proud," her mother said unexpectedly, her voice catching. "Did I ever tell you what happened to him in Oak Ridge?" Back in the 90s, Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the precinct's aggressive air conditioning. "No. What are you talking about?" "He was driving through to a job interview, nice accounting position at one of those big firms. He was so qualified, had his good suit on. Police stopped him, searched his car, made him late. By the time he got there, they'd given the job to someone else." Her mother's voice carried decades of contained anger. "He never told you because he didn't want you growing up thinking there were places you couldn't go. But it broke something in him watching that opportunity disappear." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Maya had never known this piece of family history, this generational echo of what she'd experienced today. Her father had died 5 years ago, never seeing her rise to her current position. Never knowing she would face the same discrimination in the same town 30 years later. Her next call was to her sister in Atlanta, who reacted with predictable outrage, followed by her teenage nephew, who declared her officially the most badass aunt ever after seeing clips online. These conversations grounded Maya, reminding her of the personal stakes beyond professional obligations. Her phone rang again. Colonel Richardson had arrived at the station. They met in the precinct lobby, his military bearing unchanged by retirement. He embraced her briefly, then held her at arm's length, assessing her condition with the practiced eye of someone who had seen combat injuries. "You look terrible," he stated bluntly. "You should see the other guys," she replied with a wry smile. Richardson's expression remained serious. "I've been briefed on the situation." The Attorney General's involvement escalated this significantly. "You know this isn't just about 2 officers anymore, right?" Maya nodded. "It never was. The Bureau selected you for this position for specific reasons," Richardson revealed, lowering his voice. "Your psychological profile shows exceptional resilience under pressure, uncompromising ethical standards, and the ability to navigate complex power structures without being corrupted by them." Today confirmed their assessment was correct, though I doubt anyone anticipated such an immediate test case. He guided her to a quieter area. "But Maya, you need to understand the personal cost of what's happening here. You've become the focal point of a situation with significant political implications. Every aspect of your life will be scrutinized. Threats will come, not just from inside the department but from anyone who sees police oversight as government overreach. His expression darkened. And the blue wall of silence is real. Many officers will view you as an enemy rather than as someone trying to improve the system from within. Maya absorbed this soberly. I knew the job would be challenging when I accepted it. Not like this, Richardson countered. You were supposed to have time to establish relationships, build trust, create inroads before confronting departmental cultures. Now you're starting from a position of direct confrontation. Throughout the evening, Maya took time to walk through the precinct, observing officers' reactions to her presence. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others watched with undisguised hostility, but a few approached when colleagues weren't watching. Officer Davis, a young black policeman, introduced himself quietly while refilling his coffee. Just wanted to say, not everyone here is like Keller and Donovan. Some of us have been trying to report problems for years. Another officer slipped her a folded note while passing in the hallway names and dates of other incidents worth investigating. Small gestures of support amid the prevailing atmosphere of suspicion. Maya learned that Officer Donovan had requested protection in exchange for his continuing testimony. His revelations about departmental practices had expanded beyond Keller to implicate several supervisors who had encouraged targeting minority residents. Meanwhile, Officer Keller had already been released on bail through rapid union intervention despite the severity of charges against him. The contrast highlighted the system's imbalance. Those who admitted wrongdoing often faced harsher consequences than those who denied everything and relied on institutional protection. As night fell, Maya finally visited her new office, a modest room in the federal building adjacent to the police station. The symbolism wasn't lost on her that her workplace literally overlooked the department she would be investigating. She stood at the window watching officers come and go in the parking lot below, contemplating the path forward. The day's events had transformed what should have been a structured, methodical investigation into something more immediate and confrontational. She would need to adapt her approach while maintaining focus on the larger systemic issues rather than just the individuals involved. On her desk sat a framed quote from her father that she'd carried through multiple offices. Justice is not about punishing the guilty, but about restoring what was broken. Today had revealed just how broken the system was, not just in Oak Ridge, but likely throughout her jurisdiction. As she organized case files and began mapping out investigation priorities, Maya reflected on the personal cost she was already paying and would continue to pay. Yet she remained certain of her choice to confront rather than retreat. Some costs were worth bearing if they led to meaningful change. 1 week after the incident, the consequences had spread far beyond Oak Ridge. National news outlets ran continual coverage with predictably polarized narratives. Law enforcement organizations released statements defending the officers and criticizing Maya's disproportionate response to a routine traffic stop, while civil rights groups celebrated her as a symbol of resistance against systemic racism. Professional organizations of black physicians, military veterans, and federal employees issued statements of support highlighting the persistent discrimination their members faced despite professional accomplishments. Maya navigated this new reality while methodically building her investigation. Her temporary office at the federal building became an unofficial reporting center, as dozens of community members came forward with similar experiences. Black residents described being stopped repeatedly while driving through affluent neighborhoods, subjected to unwarranted searches, and treated with suspicion regardless of their professional appearance or vehicle quality. A disturbing pattern emerged of harassment specifically targeting black professionals considering moving to Oak Ridge, exactly the situation Maya had encountered. They asked if I was lost, then searched my car because I seemed nervous, explained Dr. James Henderson, a cardiothoracic surgeon who had considered purchasing a home in the neighborhood. After they let me go, the real estate agent suddenly claimed the property was under contract. I later saw it sold to a white couple for less than I had offered. Similar stories accumulated, revealing a systematic effort to maintain the neighborhood's predominantly white demographic. Maya's team uncovered financial records showing Officer Keller had received unexplained cash deposits following several property transactions in Oak Ridge. The investigation expanded to include possible connections between certain real estate agencies, homeowners associations, and police officers willing to discourage unwanted potential residents. The mayor of Oak Ridge, Jonathan Parker, initially defended the police department with standard rhetoric about supporting our officers and waiting for all the facts. However, as tourism declined and businesses reported cancellations of conferences and events, his political calculus shifted. He requested a private meeting with Maya at a neutral location away from cameras. Dr. Wilson, the mayor, began once they were seated in a quiet corner of a downtown restaurant. I think we may have got off on the wrong foot. I want you to know that I take these allegations very seriously. Maya noted his careful use of allegations despite overwhelming evidence. I've always believed Oak Ridge should be an inclusive community, he continued. In fact, I've supported several diversity initiatives during my administration. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I'm prepared to publicly support comprehensive reforms in our police department. New training protocols, community oversight, whatever you recommend. But in return, I'd ask that your investigation focus specifically on the officers directly involved rather than broader institutional practices that might unnecessarily damage our city's reputation. The offer was transparent political support for limited reforms in exchange for containing the scope of the investigation. Maya responded with the same calm professionalism she'd maintained throughout. Mayor Parker, I appreciate your willingness to support reforms. However, my investigation will follow the evidence wherever it leads. Partial justice is no justice at all. The mayor's expression hardened slightly, though his political smile remained in place. I understand. I just hope you'll consider the many innocent residents and businesses in Oak Ridge who will suffer if our city's reputation is irreparably damaged. Meanwhile, Officer Donovan's extensive testimony enabled Maya's team to obtain search warrants for police department records. The resulting evidence revealed alarming patterns, disparities in documentation between stops of white and minority drivers, officers deactivating body cameras at statistically improbable times, reports containing identical language to justify searches of minority drivers, and internal disciplinary records showing dramatically different outcomes for similar infractions depending on whether complaints came from white or minority citizens. Several senior officers suddenly requested early retirement or transfers to other departments. Chief Harmon held a carefully choreographed press conference, maintaining his defense of the department while subtly distancing himself from the isolated actions of certain individuals who failed to uphold our standards. Maya received the forensic analysis of the substance planted in her car. As she had suspected, it wasn't cocaine, but a mixture of powdered sugar and baking soda, a common police tactic for justifying false arrests that could later be explained away as field test errors. This evidence strengthened both her personal case and the broader investigation into departmental practices. The Justice Department, recognizing the significance of the developing case, expanded Maya's authority. She now headed a special task force, with jurisdiction beyond Oak Ridge, to investigate similar patterns in neighboring departments. Her methodical, evidence-based approach began earning reluctant respect even from law enforcement officials who had initially resisted her involvement. She's not on some anti-police crusade, admitted a captain from a neighboring jurisdiction who had worked with Maya on revising training protocols. She's actually listening to officers about the challenges we face while holding the line on accountability. That's rare from federal oversight. An unexpected ally emerged in Eleanor Prentice, the elderly woman who had first intervened during Maya's detention. Mrs. Prentice organized a community group called Oak Ridge for Accountability, consisting primarily of white residents advocating for police reform. She faced significant social backlash, including being removed from boards she had served on for decades and excluded from social events. My bridge club of 30 years suddenly had no room for a new member, she told Maya during a community meeting. But my husband and I didn't stand up for what's right because it was easy. Her efforts helped demonstrate that concerns about policing practices weren't limited to minority residents, but represented broader community values about justice and equal treatment. Officer Keller, released on bail and increasingly isolated, grew desperate as evidence mounted against him. Surveillance footage captured him attempting to approach witnesses, resulting in additional charges of witness intimidation. When this failed, he made the catastrophic error of confronting Maya directly at a public forum on police reform. "You think you've won," he snarled, approaching her as she gathered materials after her presentation. "But you have no idea how deep this goes or who you're really up against." Security personnel intervened before he could get closer, but the incident was captured by multiple cameras. The outburst resulted in his bail being revoked, sending him back to detention while awaiting trial. More significantly, it demonstrated to the public the temperament and judgment of an officer who had been entrusted with a badge and weapon for over a decade. As the investigation expanded and evidence accumulated, Maya remained focused on systemic change rather than individual retribution. "This isn't about punishing specific officers," she explained in a rare media statement. "It's about transforming institutions to ensure equal protection under the law for all citizens, regardless of race or economic status." This approach gradually shifted public discourse from sensationalized coverage of her confrontation with the officers to more substantive discussions about necessary reforms in policing practices, accountability structures, and community oversight. The ripple effects continued spreading outward, touching institutions and individuals far beyond the original incident. What had begun as one more example of racial profiling was evolving into a potential watershed moment for police accountability in the region, all because Maya had refused to accept injustice as inevitable even when delivered with a badge and a chain. 6 months after that fateful afternoon in Oak Ridge, Maya stood in a federal courtroom as the judge announced the terms of a consent decree that would transform policing in the region. The Justice Department's investigation, built upon Maya's initial findings, had documented a pattern and practice of civil rights violations requiring comprehensive structural reforms. The decree mandated complete restructuring of the Oak Ridge Police Department, including new training protocols, emphasizing de-escalation and cultural competence, community oversight committees with actual disciplinary authority, mandatory body camera usage, with penalties for deactivation, and transparent disciplinary procedures, accessible to the public. Department budgets would now include funding for regular civil rights audits and community engagement programs. Chief Harmon had resigned 3 months earlier, replaced by an interim chief selected with community input. The court retained jurisdiction to monitor compliance for a minimum of 5 years, with extensions possible if benchmarks weren't met. For Officer Jason Keller, the consequences proved severe. Despite powerful union support and high-profile legal representation, the overwhelming evidence led to his conviction on multiple federal charges, including civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation. His sentencing reflected the judge's determination to send a clear message about abuse of authority. "The badge you wore represented the public's trust," the judge stated during sentencing. "Your actions didn't just harm Dr. Wilson. They damage that essential trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. This court must impose a sentence that reflects the gravity of betraying such trust." The resulting 15-year sentence exceeded typical penalties for police misconduct cases, establishing a precedent that would influence future prosecutions. Officer Brett Donovan faced a different outcome. His early cooperation and extensive testimony against departmental practices earned him limited immunity. He pleaded guilty to lesser charges and received probation with community service requirements that included speaking at police academies about the consequences of remaining silent when witnessing misconduct. "I told myself I was just following orders, that I couldn't risk my career by speaking up," he explained during one such presentation. "But that silence cost me my career anyway, along with my self-respect. And it caused real harm to innocent people." Maya ensured the investigation didn't end with convenient scapegoats. Several supervisors who had enabled the department's toxic culture also faced consequences, from demotions to criminal charges, depending on their level of involvement. The case established legal precedent for FBI intervention in local police matters when pattern evidence suggested civil rights violations. Maya's methodical approach became a template for similar investigations, nationwide balancing accountability, with recognition that most officers served honorably. Reform isn't anti-police, she frequently emphasized in training sessions. It's pro-justice, which benefits ethical officers as much as the communities they serve. Maya used her new public platform to advocate for policing reforms while acknowledging the legitimate challenges officers faced. She established dialogue between community leaders and reform-minded officers, creating collaborative approaches to rebuilding trust. Several young black community members, inspired by her example, applied to join the newly restructured police force, believing change could come from both outside pressure and internal transformation. Eleanor Prentice donated substantial funds to establish a community center in the neighborhood where Maya had been detained. The center created a space where residents and police officers could interact positively outside crisis situations, featuring educational programs, recreational activities, and a legal aid clinic specializing in civil rights cases. "I've lived in Oak Ridge for nearly 5 decades," Mrs. Prentice explained at the center's opening. "But until I witnessed what happened to Dr. Wilson, I never truly understood the different reality many of my neighbors experienced." This center represents our commitment to seeing and hearing each other across those divides. Maya received numerous job offers carrying greater prestige and compensation, political appointments, private sector positions, even academic roles at prestigious universities. She declined them all, choosing to remain in her current position where she could continue the work that mattered most. She did, however, accept an invitation to teach occasional classes at the FBI Academy, sharing her unique perspective on civil rights enforcement with future agents. On a crisp autumn morning, 6 months to the day after her detention, Maya visited the streetlight where she had been chained. The city had since installed a small plaque there, commemorating the incident as a turning point in local history. As she stood reflecting on everything that had changed, and everything that hadn't, a police cruiser pulled alongside the curb. Maya tensed instinctively before recognizing the vehicle's community liaison markings. A young black officer stepped out not to harass her, but to express gratitude. "Dr. Wilson, I'm Officer Marcus Jenkins." He extended his hand. "I just wanted to thank you personally. I grew up in this community, always wanted to serve as an officer, but feared I'd have to compromise my integrity to fit into the department culture. Your work made it possible for someone like me to serve without making that compromise." Their conversation represented the possibility of genuine change, not immediate or complete, but substantive and ongoing. As they talked, several residents passing by greeted Officer Jenkins by name, the casual familiarity suggesting relationships built on respect rather than fear. Maya left the encounter with cautious optimism. True justice wasn't a destination, but an ongoing journey requiring constant vigilance, courage, and hope. Her personal ordeal had transformed not just one department, but sparked a movement toward accountability that continued to grow beyond what she could have imagined on that fateful day when she refused to accept injustice even when it came. Wrapped in a badge and a chain. What would you do if faced with injustice from those sworn to protect? Would you have the courage to stand up like Maya did? Comment below with your thoughts on this story, and whether you believe one person can truly make a difference in changing an entire system. If this story moved you or made you think differently about justice and accountability, please like and subscribe to support more content that explores these important issues. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing up against injustice isn't just possible, it's necessary. Thank you for joining me on this journey through chains of justice. And remember, sometimes the strongest chains aren't the ones that bind us, but the ones we use to pull others toward accountability. Maya Wilson's story teaches us that true change requires both individual courage and systemic accountability. When facing injustice, the path of least resistance is often silence or escape, but meaningful transformation demands confrontation of uncomfortable truths. Maya could have used her connections to avoid consequences, but chose instead to face the system directly, understanding that her position of privilege came with responsibility. The story illustrates how racism persists not just through overtly hateful individuals, but through institutional practices that become normalized over time. Change requires documentation, evidence, and methodical exposure of these patterns. A single incident becomes powerful when connected to larger systemic issues. We also learn that allies come from unexpected places. Mrs. Prentice demonstrated how witnesses to injustice have moral obligations that transcend social comfort. Her willingness to risk social standing reminds us that privilege carries responsibility. Perhaps most importantly, the story shows that justice isn't achieved through punishment alone, but through transformation of systems. Maya's focus remained on structural change rather than personal vengeance, recognizing that true justice creates pathways for healing and prevents future harm. Finally, we learn that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting. Despite it, Maya's military training gave her physical tools, but her moral compass provided the true strength to stand against injustice. What would you do if faced with injustice? From those sworn to protect, would you have the courage to stand up like Maya did, or would fear of consequences hold you back? Comment below sharing a time when you witnessed or experienced unfair treatment and how you responded. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances and finding their inner strength. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one person's courage can ignite meaningful change. Thank you for joining me on this journey through chains of justice. And remember, true power isn't measured by the authority you hold, but by your willingness to stand for what's right, even when standing alone.